Welcome back to another episode for our Study GRC privacy stream. So you have myself, Chris Whitlock, and then also Dwight Turner here to go through and just talk a little bit about different privacy aspects. And today, what are we doing today?
Today we're talking about biometric privacy, which is a fun one because we can't really escape it. So if you've got things to say about this, we want to hear from you in the chat. We'd love to hear from y'all. We want to make this interactive as possible. Some of these privacy topics can be really heavy, so feel free to jump in, ask your questions. We take your feedback, and sometimes we turn them into episodes. So we really appreciate everyone staying along and, sounding off.
Yeah, and what I like so much about today's topic is biometrics, which really affects everybody nowadays, especially with our mobile devices.
Let's see. How would you say that biometrics impact you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, one of the biggest key things here is like my Samsung device. I think that's the biggest way that it impacts the average day user is using your fingerprint or facial recognition just to unlock your device. And although it may not be required, it's a convenience factor. Although there's a lot of other privacy aspects in day-to-day life that a lot of people I don't feel are really that aware of. One example being like when you walk into Walmart, they use facial recognition data as soon as you enter their parking lot. That's another really good example of how that impacts me on an average day.
Stay out of Walmart and stay off your phone. So I don't know. I wish we could. It's one of those that's really hard to avoid. That's what gets me excited about talking about this today, because I feel like everyone is familiar. Everyone has had to deal with this, from whether, going into a new country in the airport, or even real ID is actually a controversial in some states. This where you have to use your have your ID linked to some biometrics for even to get through airport security. So this is a hot topic,
and it's just something that keeps growing as well.
All right, sound off.
Yeah, so this very first one here. So like, what is biometrics? What does that actually mean?
Wrong answers only. Jump into the chat. Let us know which one of these you think best applies. I kind of like a workout routine specifically for robots. Robots need exercise too.
Or it could be D, the science of identifying humans based on crimes they didn't commit yet. So go ahead and drop yours down in the comments or in the chat there and let us know.
This is my favorite biometric related meme. When you try to call for help, but your phone won't recognize your face.
Yeah. All right. So the different types of biometrics. So a lot of you may be familiar with it, but just some of the primary examples here that are becoming more common. We have fingerprint, facial recognition, iris scanning, and palm vein scanning as well. And so, like, I'll go ahead and touch on a couple of these. So, like the fingerprint, you may need that for a background check. That's something I had to do previously for a job, actually. Also on your cell phone or for your iPhone or Android device, I think is a really common thing. Also, different employers, it's actually surprising how many employers still have fingerprint, locks or on their work devices. So on your work computer, you may have a fingerprint scanner. I still have heard about that being pretty popular still in the government. And then we also have facial recognition, which I briefly touched on as well. A lot of that happens, just in the general public, surprisingly, but we use that to unlock our phones. Windows even has a feature of that as well, for your web camera itself to unlock it, or as a second factor. It just goes based on the shape of your face, and it's precise enough. So did you want to go ahead and touch on these next couple ones?
I think what I want to add is that, according to laws, especially things like GDPR, the definition of biometrics can actually be pretty broad. So I'm just going to read it really quickly. I know you might want to talk about the palm veins, but just to interrupt a little bit here, that personal data resulting from specific technical processing relating to physiological, or behavioral characteristics. So that includes a ton of stuff. It includes DNA and maybe things that we're not even thinking about. But I just want to mention that when we talk about the actual definition, these are some of the common ones that we see on a day-to-day basis that we're using for the discussion today. But it actually includes a lot of different types of data.
Yeah, I think that's a really good inclusion.
Yeah. And what do we miss? So palm veins?
Yeah, so like palm vein scan, for an example, that's something that, of course I learned about for the Sec Plus, but the first case that I actually seen that being implemented at all is actually for ISC squared for some of their testing centers. So some of their testing centers, if they have that equipment available, then they do require that for the exams in person. And what that is it literally scans your veins in your hand and wrist, and it's mapped out. It's way more precise than even your fingerprint is. And it just puts that into ones and zeros on the computer as in data, and it's in there forever, basically. So you've really got to check those privacy policies and how are they protecting that information. That could definitely be a concern, especially as we move into like post-quantum encryption and so forth as well.
For sure, for sure. It makes me think about, all the ways that they're just trying to do everything quicker. I think we talked about Amazon, doing checkout. It makes me think about going through the airport. What is that? The one company that does the facial recognition thing. I think sometimes they're doing fingerprints and things as well to kind of get people moving through the line quick.
But I think Amazon was doing that for a moment.
Yeah, it's definitely something we can't avoid.
Yeah, and then we also have like the iris scanning as well. So I think that's a little less common, but like it also states here, for high security settings, and especially once pricing becomes more feasible for that, then that may become even more common. I think that's one of the big reasons for the fingerprint and facial recognition is those are the cheapest options, and why those are way more. And then we could kind of jump through these next couple slides pretty quickly here. So we already kind of touched on fingerprint recognition. Did you want to go ahead and talk about some of these challenges?
Yeah, your fingerprints don't change, so if that data is compromised, it's a really big issue. They can be spoofed with 3D printing and things like that. I think people like it, especially in terms of like law enforcement and things like that, because it can be so accurate. But it is one of those that once that data is out, it's hard to go back on.
And also the shortage of regulatory protections at this time in the US at least, right?
Yeah, that's true for all of the different types of biometric data. We don't really have a lot of laws. We'll show the map later, but there's just a handful of states, really one or two.
Yeah, and then the facial recognition.
Yeah, facial recognition. I think this is the one we're probably all the most familiar with. Yeah, we just don't have a lot of agency in terms of saying no. Sometimes you walk in a place and it might be some small placard, and they consider that as informing you, your face is being scanned. It can be pretty frustrating to deal with, but then, again, back to the phones, we deal with it all the and
Well, they're also scared too on the bias and inaccuracies as well.
that's where I was going next. I mean, it's so powerful. I think I mentioned to you before we started, 5 years ago, they were scanning like 3 faces a second or something like that. So these tools are so powerful. Now we're in the era of AI. So we have issues with scans of women, scans of darker skinned people coming back, mismatch and things like that. And then also we have that sort of bias that might be in there. And then we might also have some bias from our AI models or things like that. And that's a pretty scary thing, even to held, detained or whatever, falsely, it can really impact your.
Yeah, and I think like a really good example of that would be, like an airport, for an example, if they implement a camera system that utilizes facial recognition and, how somebody moves around or their facial expression, and then they utilize AI to basically pull people out, of that selection group to be pulled, aside, that AI system can be biased. And a lot of different, pretty well-known people like Jax has talked about AI being very biased, actually, just based on what model and so forth.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah, and then also here we have Iris. Yep, go ahead.
I don't know if you want to talk about this more or skip to those privacy laws that we were mentioning, but I would invite people to do a deep dive. There's tons of videos. This is an issue that's a civil rights issue. It crosses different countries. Everyone's sort of concerned about the rights being violated in China and all over the world, using this new technology. We could be digging into that all day.
Oh yeah, we'll show a really good example of that here in just a. So like some of the different privacy concerns that we've already kind of touched on already. We have like data security. we're giving them our information, our biometric data. And so are they taking the proper steps to protect? And are those standards or best practices even, especially moving on into the future? Like for an example, like what was that, 24andMe,
23andMe.
DNA,
Yeah.
yeah, 23andMe, and they have all of this DNA information, and they could be selling that off, or they could get breached again, or any of this stuff could happen. The same thing can happen with fingerprints, facial recognition, palm vein scans, any of this different surveillance and monitoring, concerns, and that affect your privacy rights. That also goes really closely with the. And then also, you're really familiar with like the consent portion, if you want to cover the next.
Yeah, I think, really quickly, I think we mentioned informed consent, that, making sure that people understand and actually have an option, to participate. And that's not always clear. People are not always and we talked in a previous episode what the actual meaning of consent is. We want it to be freely as well. And sometimes, depending on what it's being used for, sometimes you just don't really have the choice to opt out. If it's a phone, if it's iris scans, even for NGOs giving out aid and things like that. So a lot of people who don't have a lot of agency sometimes, kind of forced to use these sorts of systems. So that is a real contentious issue. And then you have the issue of data retention and data deletion. I think that's right up there with data security. Tend to see people hoarding that data. We need to have clear guidelines. We need to have legal protections that make sure that companies go back and delete that, and they're not using it forever or selling it.
Yeah, especially that, right for delete, modification, and so forth. Yeah, and then here's like this.
Yeah, I mentioned there's only really like one or two, CCPA, CPRA. They include biometric data and protected data, and it is considered a category of sensitive in California. So you kind of have the same protections that you have in the CCPA, and that might be a whole episode that we need to talk about, is what, get into detail about the CCPA in an episode. But probably the strongest specific and comprehensive law, and by comprehensive, it covers the most use cases. There's just not like a lot of gaps in it, was probably that Illinois law. Okay, little quick.
Yeah, so that kind of comes into this pop quiz. So, like, which of the following laws is enforced exclusively by the state attorney general without allowing individuals to sue for violation?
So I kind of did away. If you're familiar with the CCPA, one of the things about it, it has a private right of action, which means individuals can sue in the case of a death. And so you're going to be able to cross off CCPA off that list. The AI accountability, is not really relevant here. Then we're down to Illinois and Texas. We just kind of mentioned Illinois being and covering a lot of things, where you see in the Texas, they're mostly concerned about the collection of biometric data. The Texas law doesn't do as much to protect citizens, and it definitely doesn't include a private right of action. The only enforcement you're going to see there is with the attorney general, where Cali and Illinois both include private rights of action, or basically gives people the right to take action in for violations of those laws. So Texas.
Yeah, and we'll attach the slide deck to these videos as well, along with various other sources that kind of relate to it, and especially around the privacy realm. But we hope that we kind of give you a really good introduction here, and then I'm going to go ahead and show you an example.
These, I think these were the Meta.
I believe that's what they used, and then they modified it or made software for it. But yeah,
they kind of modified them. I think Meta came out pretty quickly and said, "Hey, this is not how it's intended to be used." But I'm glad you brought up Meta, because their first big enforcement actions for that Illinois law, they sued, and it was end up being a huge settlement because they had biometric data that they failed. So I think that pretty clearly illustrates what we've been talking about today, why this is such a big issue, why it's so dangerous, why we whatever we can to protect our data when possible, and why we need to, we need informed people to be in these companies and be, asking questions about what we're doing with people's data. How long do we Are we informing them, why we're collecting it and all of that? It's a hairy topic, but we appreciate y'all digging through it with us today.
Right? Yeah. If you guys have any other topics in mind or otherwise, definitely drop those in the comments or in the chat there. And we look forward to seeing you guys next.
See y'all.